I'm Nolan Dalla for another edition of An Intelligent Conversation. I'm here with Matt Lessinger, my co-host. Monday afternoon / evening, lot to talk about in politics. This is about a week after the inauguration. Our last show and our last panel did such an amazing job, myself accepted from this, that we decided to do a part 2. And that's why we're here to talk about the inauguration and the first 6 or 7 days of the Biden administration and what does that portend for the future. Let me introduce our guest, my co-host. First of all, Matt Lessinger. How you doing today, Matt?
Doing good, thanks.
Excellent.
Thanks for striking up the band again.
You're going to be playing analyst today. You're going to be one of those crazy people that just has a lot of opinions and isn't afraid to share them. Just like Vin Narayanan there across from me. And if you're playing Hollywood Squares, he's like the Paul Lynde, I guess, or is that the center square, whatever. Anyway, Vin Narayanan,
Shadow Stevens,
a political writer and editor from Washington, D.C., now living in Baltimore. Don't explain that to me. It's his 5th or 6th time on the show. Vin Narayanan, nice to have you with us.
thanks for having me back. Much appreciated. These are always fun. Looking forward to it.
Very much so, and you were so good. Glad to have you back. Mark Tenner doing his encore appearance because he's got political experience out the yin-yang, going back more than 50 years in California politics as a speechwriter, was very close in the Tom Bradley, the mayor of Los Angeles. His administration knows all the big wigs in Nevada and California. And before we proceed with the show, Mark Tenner, I've heard this great story, but I've got to get you to tell it here to the audience that's now joining us on Facebook Live. By the way, do type in your questions. We'll answer them hopefully on the air. Mark Tenner, you actually debated, and I think won, a debate against Ronald Reagan. Tell us that story.
Well, this we're going back 50 years. This was during the time of the student unrest. Vietnam was still going on. Nixon had just bombed Cambodia. There were student strikes, Kent State. This was that period of time. And I had organized a group of students to sort of be realistic in trying to solve problems and work with the administration and not just demonstrate and break up things. Anyway, right about that same time, Ronald Reagan was governor of California. And he was a very popular governor, obviously very conservative. And also at that time, the University of California was tuition free. When I was a freshman, just to give you an idea, it cost me $6 to go to UCLA. My last year of graduate school was $18,000, and now it's quite a bit more than that. Anyway,
that's awesome. $6. That's just so incredible.
You get what you pay for.
And that was the student union fee. Yeah. Anyhow, I was a leader of this student organization. The campus committee to bridge the gap, and the gap meaning really the difference between the students, the student liberals, and the administration conservatives. So they wanted to institute, Reagan wanted to institute tuition at the University of California. So obviously we as students were all against that. And I was invited by KABC Radio to debate Ronald Reagan on the radio whether or not tuition should be instituted at the University of California. And we met at the studio, and we went into the booth, and we proceeded to debate it for an hour. And I gave all of the young idealistic reasons why there shouldn't be tuition and so on, and he presented all of his arguments. Anyway, at the end of the debate, he walks over and he shakes my hand. He says, "Young man, I have a lot of respect for you. I really enjoyed that. And I just want you to know, from a debate perspective, you won the debate. Wow. However, under no circumstances will there not be tuition at the University of California because we just don't have enough money to pay the nut." Well, he didn't use the word nut. That's my expression. We don't have enough money to run the University of California without charging tuition. And we sat and we talked for a couple of minutes, and he was the most gracious gentleman you can ever imagine. And we were so far on opposite sides politically and ideologically. And he sort of taught me a lesson about sometimes you just have to shut up and listen. Anyway, that was the story.
Mark, that's a great story. Thank you for opening the show with that. I just think that's a terrific story. It shows something that you were and still are a liberal on most issues, and yet you met this man who was very gracious, you said, and you developed obviously some fondness and respect for him. Obviously, you didn't agree with his policies when he was governor or later president, but I think that kind of leads into the reason for our show today, which is unity, which is listening, which is understanding, which is the name of our show, An Intelligent Conversation. Let's start talking about Biden administration day one, which was about 5 or 6 days ago. Last Tuesday, was it? So 6 days ago. Let's talk about just your first impressions, general impressions of what happened, the change in Washington, obviously from the moment that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris took the oath, your impressions of that day and right afterward. Let's start with you, Matt Lessinger. What did you think about the inauguration?
I think it was just refreshing. I mean, it's the first inauguration that I've ever had like a sense of fearful anticipation, right? It's like you're hoping that nothing is going to go wrong. And I don't think I've ever had that feeling before. And thankfully, nothing did go wrong. And not only that, it was fantastically done. I was going to say under the circumstances, but under any circumstances, I think it was a great inauguration. I think, the poet Amanda Gorman, who honestly, I had no expectations from that. I mean, that was a fantastic moment, having her reading. And anyway, so just bottom line, it exceeded expectations in every way for me. And I was very thankful for it. As far as the days that have come since then, I'm
gonna hold you right there, Matt.
Okay.
I'm gonna stop you there
Sure.
because we're gonna get into that in the show. We're talking about just the inauguration. Sorry to be rude,
Sure.
but we got a lot to cover. I don't want you to spend all your gunpowder on that first answer. So, Vin, what'd you think of the inauguration?
It was refreshingly normal. Former President Bush encapsulated President Trump's inauguration in the best way possible when he said, "Wow, that was some weird shit." This was not weird shit. It was refreshingly normal, and it was actually, I mean, it was really enjoyable. Look, Amanda Gorman stole the show. She was by far the most effective communicator, the most effective speaker, and by the way, having to tear up her speech. Like she had it done on New Year's, whatever, having had to tear it up after the insurrection and redo the whole thing, and the way to capture the moment and the concept and the ideas, and to bring it back to Mark's conversation with Reagan, bring back the idea of America's, that city or that country on the hill, the shining example, all that sort of stuff. The way she was able to do that was, I mean, just brilliant. And when she's 22, 23 years old, holy cow. I mean, the talent that young woman has is just amazing. So we'll start with that. It was refreshingly normal to wonder why Joe Biden's family Bible was so big, right? Because we didn't have to worry about what the speech was about. We could look at those details and say, wow, that's a big ass Bible. And so we could do things like that, right? It was fun, it was enjoyable, and it was interesting to see how a group of political professionals handled the inauguration. The tone they struck, reconciliation right off the bat, reaching out across the aisle, preaching the concept of unity, being able to respect people who you disagree with, all of those sorts of things. And yet I couldn't help but think it was noteworthy that the line that people objected to the most was, you want to know what, we need to stop race from dividing us, and we need to eliminate racism. The idea that, you know, eliminating racism and making sure that that racial divide is bridged and gapped was somehow the most controversial statement, you know, it just shows just how far we have to go. That the idea of eliminating racism is controversial.
Mark Tenner?
Well, Matt said that it was refreshing, and Vince said it was refreshingly normal. I thought it was refreshingly entertaining. I thought the ethos of the entire event was just, it warmed, as Churchill would say, it warmed the cockles of my heart. From the beginning, with Lady Gaga doing the Star Spangled Banner like I've never heard it sung before.
That was fantastic.
Okay, I mean, and looking up at the flag, and it brought tears to my eyes. And this young 22-year-old poet, her command of the language was not just what she wrote. I'm sure a number of people, and I'm sure everybody here, saw some of the interviews that she did over the next couple of days, and they were asking her questions of the words that she would use to answer the questions. Her command of the language, her ability to express herself in the way in which she could, it was astounding. This is what I studied as an undergraduate and as a young graduate student, and I've always believed that to be able to command the language and communicate and have other people do what you want them to do through the use of your words is no greater facility or faculty that exists in the world today. And she was extraordinary. And the tone that she set, although I don't think it was because she set the tone, I think it's allowed some people, unfortunately not enough, to listen to some of the things that have gone on in the subsequent days to the inauguration, which had a great deal to do with using language to express what it is that you want people to understand. And it brings to mind the early days of Camelot, and the way that Kennedy could turn a phrase, and the way that Barack Obama could use the language. Just extraordinary. It was a great day, and I teared up, and it was refreshing. It was refreshingly normal. It was refreshingly entertaining, but it was also refreshing and encouraging. And that was you can't ask for a better day one than to be encouraged.
Beautiful, beautiful statement, Mark. I'd like to ask you, Vince, something that this goes back to, I think, show number 8 or 9 that we did. This is our 12th An Intelligent Conversation. But Vin Narayanan, you were one of our guests on the night of wasn't the election night, but that Saturday. It was about 4 nights later. And you talked the last couple of minutes of our show. And I must say that even as a leftist and somebody who's been very liberal, I don't think I understood until your sermon, really, about what Kamala Harris is, that moment for her and what that meant to you. I'm going to ask you to revisit that thought that you had that night, if you can recall it. I certainly recall it because I was almost moved to tears myself. What were your thoughts seeing Kamala Harris up there on that stage taking that oath?
Absolute pride. And it's interesting the way she was introduced. She wasn't introduced as Kamala Harris. She was introduced as Kamala Devi Harris. And Devi being the Indian name, the Indian name, or her mom's name, her mom's last name. And to me, hugely important. Never seen that before, Kamala Devi Harris. I mean, and so it was hugely important. And to a certain degree, seeing her introduced up on the stage and taking that oath of office really made me miss the fact that we didn't have an inaugural parade of any sort. And we didn't have all the pomp and circumstance that led up to the moment, because her being there represents a lot of things. I would have loved to have seen her sorority sisters at Howard stepping down Pennsylvania Avenue and representing in that way. You know, when at the Democratic National Convention, she gave a shout out to her chitties. Chitties is the Tamil word for aunt. So Kamala Devi Harris doesn't represent Indian heritage, which, you know, my parents are from India. She also represents Tamil heritage, and my parents are Tamilian. And so there's a depth of connection there. So the absolute pride in seeing that was remarkable. And it made me want to celebrate in ways that, you know, I haven't wanted to celebrate previously. So I was proud, I was joyful, and I was a bit wistful because it felt like, as great as the moment was, as great as the inauguration was, the celebration that should have happened, and the celebration that we should have had as a nation for this moment, we didn't get a chance to have it, and we won't get a chance to have it. And in that standpoint, it was, you know, a bit wistful, I think is the way to put it.
Well, let me just comment before you ask your next question, Nolan. Vin, I don't think it's bad. In fact, I think it's very good that we didn't have it. Not that it would not have been traditional and so on, but it's consistent, and not that it was intended to be that way, because circumstances created the nature of the inauguration. But I think it's an indication of the way in which Joseph Biden and Kamala Harris are going to make every attempt in which to govern, which is without the pomp and ceremony. And maybe not as much traditional, although there may be some traditional events, but they want to go step by step by step forward, recognizing they're going to be taking steps back and accomplish some things.
I agree with you, Mark. From a tone setting standpoint, it is probably really beneficial and helpful. And so I mean, I agree with you on that standpoint. For people who haven't seen people from their own community represented at the highest levels of power, it's also, there's an element of disappointment there. There's the element that we did not get a chance to celebrate that arrival. We didn't get a chance to be joyous of that arrival in a setting that, you know, even when members of our community reach the highest levels, it's always under a weird circumstance. And that sort of, to draw an NFL analogy or a sports analogy, it's like every time an African-American coach gets hired, he gets the shitty team that's gone 0-16 and has no shot at success, right? And you do that enough times, and you get that feeling. And so, and not only that, but, you know, representation at these levels are so rare, and you don't know when the next time it's going to come around. And I saw something interesting on Twitter where you had moms and their daughters huddled around TV sets watching it and just beaming at the sight of Kamala Harris being inaugurated as Vice President of the United States. So I agree that from a governing standpoint, and, you know, that is, you know, at the end of the day, the most important thing, it's probably very beneficial. But from a personal standpoint, and, you know, just and a societal standpoint, because I think it's important to celebrate it, it was sort of wistful and disappointing to me.
You know, one of the things, so completely acknowledging your point, and honestly, you know, much like Nolan said, I might not have thought of that had you not said it, because I think I had the same reaction as Mark, that, you know, there's never been more urgency to go right to work. So it was like, it was
Yes.
fitting in a way where it was like, no, we're not going to take the time to celebrate. Like it was a more workmanlike inauguration. I think the other thing that maybe I was very naive about it, but it was like as a child, or not even a child, as a teenager or whatever, you'd hear about the inauguration parties, the inauguration balls, and how exclusive they were, and it was like red carpet type events. And I don't think it was until very recently that I realized that those were really set up for lobbyists and for people to get their first crack at talking to the incoming president and vice president and trying to get their agenda to become part of the incoming administration's agenda. And I'm so glad we didn't have that. I acknowledge your point that there deserved to be more celebration, but given that that's the form that celebration takes on in Washington, D.C., maybe this is the start of a new era where we're not going to have that, where lobbyists are not going to have the president or vice president's ear on their first few days of office. One could hope.
Well, I'm going to say, I hate to say dream on because that's such a nice idealistic.
I'm being idealistic, I know.
Yeah, but you're right. It's nice to see the possibilities, I think is what we're saying here. Let's go on to, good point, Matt and everyone. Let's go on to, I hate to say the other side of the coin, but we have to discuss it before we talk about the present and the future. It was Fortress Washington and still is. I mean, the National Guard out, all the 50 state capitals surrounded by certainly protective services and police officers. I mean, America not looking like the America that we're used to seeing. Vin, before we came on the air, you noted that there was one state capital that the protest, quote unquote protest, didn't exactly go very well. Tell that story and then we'll discuss it.
Yeah, in Albany, there were supposed to be thousands of people showing up to protest President Biden's inauguration. And, there were supposed to be protests all over the country and most of them didn't materialize. In Albany, one person showed up, just one. And he showed up and he looked forlorn and he talked to the media about feeling betrayed because he thought thousands were people going to show up and you had all these barriers and security there and one lonely supporter show up. And it was an interesting testament to how quickly the more bellicose parts of this beat a retreat and said, all right, we've got to regroup. And we've got to figure this out. But it was also interesting the depth to which this is still felt in this country, that, the election was stolen. You still have people that are talking about it, acting on it, going out, and so it was interesting, but it was this really weird picture. If you haven't seen the picture, you should go look it out. It is simultaneously funny and sad and all at the same time. And on the one hand, you feel for them, is because like anyone that shows up to a party or shows up to an event where there's supposed to be hundreds of people, or even worse, anyone that's hosted a party where you're supposed to have 50 people show up and only 2 or 3 do, that's the sort of feeling that this guy had. And so on the one hand, you feel for him. On the other hand, it is an illustration of, just how much, just how the environment has changed in the last 3 to 4 days for a variety of reasons. Parler being suspended, people hopping on a Telegram and Twitter, more difficult to organize, government taking this seriously and putting up barriers and fences and activating guard and that sort of thing. So I want to do that. And the last thing I want to touch on real quickly is the phrase Fortress DC. And the reason I brought up this concept of Fortress DC is if you go back to, the 80s or the 90s, and you used to be able to drive down Pennsylvania Avenue. And not only drive down Pennsylvania Avenue, you used to drive right past the White House. And then the Clinton administration, for, reasons that made sense, closed off driving past the White House and, it turned into a great street hockey game. And it's sort of been like that ever since. And then, President Trump, after all of the Black Lives Matter protests and that sort of thing, gated off just a huge square block area around it. And so now you can't even gaze at the White House without binoculars or a telescope. And now you have that same fencing around the Capitol. And the idea, and then you had all the fencing and all that stuff around other state capitals. And who knows whether that's going to stay permanent or not. I'm sure some people would like it to stay permanent. And the idea that government is accessible to the people, and the idea that the basic premise of American of our democracy, that it requires the consent of the governed. I believe Fortress DC and the erection of fortresses throughout the country begins to threaten that concept. It begins to create a disconnect between that concept. And I think that's problematic. And I think it's something that we need to worry about and figure out how to properly balance security with making sure that, people still have access to the halls of justice, to the halls of power, and are able to get in and see the people's business being done. And I think it's actually really important, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. And it's actually one of the things that needs to be addressed early on in this administration.
Mark, I'm going to throw this one at you that this will pick up on a topic that you discussed on the last show. You're a student of history, and you were talking about, by the way, we can invoke Goodwin's law here because I don't like making these comparisons. I realize they are offensive to a lot of people, but I think it's apt here. You were talking about the rise of the Third Reich and Nazi Germany, and you were talking about one of the more recent books on this that you were reading. I gave some thought to that, and that's been a topic about the Trump administration that's now gone. I'm going to give you an analogy to post-war America and post-war Europe. If you recall the Nuremberg trials, which of course was the halls of justice for the former leaders of the Third Reich, and that the American public and largely the European public as well didn't give two shits about the Nuremberg trials. Now, I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't have been held. Obviously, they should have been, because justice had to be done. But the public didn't care. By the way, that's reflected in a movie, the Spencer Tracy movie from 1960 or 61, Judgment at Nuremberg. I'd like you to reflect on that when you talk about, and answer the question, which is long here, about trying Trump administration officials, including Trump himself, for crimes, including impeachment. I'd like you to bring in that historical reference, that if the public is not behind something, does that impact maybe the direction we should go in a post-Trump America?
Boy, that's a big question, and it's not complicated, but it is extraordinarily complex, because you have a number of individuals that did a number of things to a number of degrees. Trump being right up there at the top, whether he incited a riot or defining what inciting means. And fortunately, the way an impeachment trial is run, the rules of evidence don't apply. So it's a question of understanding and interpretation on what one chooses. There's a balance that has to be achieved. If you've been listening, as we all have for the last several days, on one hand, you have a group of intelligent, caring people who say this is a waste of time. Let's focus on the future, and let's focus on trying to do something that's going to be positive for this country, and not allow people to focus on this trial for somebody that's already gone. Then you have the people who, I'm not going to say that they're idealists, but that love our country, what the founders did, remarkably so many years ago, and that there's an ethical responsibility not to ignore what took place. So how do you balance the two? Well, fortunately, we don't make the choice. The choice has been made. Yes, the Senate can walk and chew gum at the same time. Theoretically, I'm not so sure that they can on an ongoing, but we're going to have a trial and there are going to be witnesses, and it's going to be a much better trial from an evidentiary standpoint. Last impeachment trial was, and in all likelihood, what needs to happen isn't going to happen. And what I think needs to happen, and then I'm going to talk about the other players other than Trump, because I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about this as we go through this night, is that I don't believe he's going to get, there are going to be enough votes for him to be found guilty, which means the thing that's most important is that he's found guilty, and then they majority vote whether he can ever hold office again. I think that is far more important, both from a practical standpoint and more importantly from a symbolic standpoint, that the Senate says he can never hold public office again. The impeachment is simply a step to get to that point. And unfortunately, the most important point, which is that vote, I'm afraid isn't going to happen because I don't think there's going to be enough votes. Now, as far as the other people, believe me, Ted Cruz could care less if he gets a vote, which isn't going to happen because there aren't going to be enough votes.
I'm sorry,
I'm sorry,
Mark. Mark, you broke up on us a little bit there. You pick it up with Ted Cruz. I want to hear what you said. Sorry.
Okay. Ted Cruz, I want to start to now talk about some of the other players. Okay. You've got the publishers, the Hawleys and the Cruzes, who participated in this. The people don't even know their names. The 127 or 107?
137, I think, yeah.
137 members of the House of Representatives that said that Trump won the election, or that Biden didn't win it, however you want to interpret that. Those names get lost. They get lost in nobody. It's not that nobody cares. There's too many, and it's just the minutia is too small. But you've got Hawley and Cruz in the Senate discussing the possibility of an introduction of a state voted on by the Senate that says you guys did not act properly. They're not going to kick them out of the Senate. That's never going to happen. And so you've got three visible people really out there: Hawley, Cruz, and Trump. Trump's going to go through the Hawley and Cruz, who is extraordinarily intelligent and quite articulate, is going to be a pain in our ass for a long time to come. Then you have the thousands or hundreds at this point in time of people participated, that rank file that got caught up in the crowd, the retrievers, lost control of the fences and the damage and stormed the Capitol. Many of them they'll go to trial, they'll be found guilty, and they will be punished. And it's, like I said, it's clicks. There's a great deal there. It's not simple. Yes, it's extraordinarily important that they find many of these people guilty and are punished in some form. And I think it's incredibly important to this country, but I don't believe it's going to happen, that Trump be voted in the Senate never to hold public office. So I don't know if that answers your question. It was very broad and not a simple answer, Nolan.
And that kind of came to me.
Yeah, Mark, you actually left out one group that I'm really interested in, which is the 10 Republicans that voted to impeach, and what their outcome is going to be. Because look, if you take a look at Liz Cheney and the House leadership, they're talking about possibly stripping her of her leadership duties. I don't think it's going to happen, but their primary challengers have all been announced. In fact, all 10, you've got primary challengers for all 10. And the idea that
already?
Yes.
Already? Are you serious?
Yes, you've got,
yeah, this is something that I wanted to talk about later, is the difference between the elections in 2022 for the House and for the Senate as it relates to the people that support or don't support impeachment.
All right. Well, I saw that Liz Cheney's already under attack. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Vin.
Yeah, you've got primary challengers lined up for all 10 of them. You've got, and which is remarkable in and of itself, the idea that a quote unquote vote of conscience is going to get you in trouble this way is absolutely remarkable. But it's not just the 10. You've got all sorts of weird stuff going on. Like you've got the Arizona Republican Party, I mean, in Maricopa County and other places, censuring Cindy McCain, censuring Jeff Flake for speaking
and the governor,
out,
the Republican governor.
And the governor. Yeah. And then you've got, I think it was in Marion County, Georgia. You had a Republican politician there say, "Hey, we've got to change the election laws. We don't have to change all of them, but we have to change election laws just enough to make sure we have a shot at winning." And this is once again a case of speaking the quiet part out loud. And so you've got this whole sort of apparatus of things that, to me, the Republican response to all of this is, to me, as intriguing as what you outlined in terms of what's going to happen to Cruz and that group of people.
All right, Matt Lessinger, there's a buffet of possibilities. Go ahead, sir.
No, I wanted to ask Vin, because he's, as we know, he's always made some good points, and from one show to another, they tend to have a connection. And you had made the point previously that a lot of Democrats have gotten elected in typically red states because the Republican challengers were historically weak. So now I don't know exactly who these primary challengers are. I mean, I've heard things about this so-called Patriot Party that might be forming. I'll believe that when I see it. But I mean,
I'm sorry, Matt. Are you basically suggesting they're basically Kelly Loeffler types?
I would go a step further. I mean, Kelly Loeffler was, well, no, okay, fine. They're Kelly Loeffler types. Yeah, I'll give you that. I mean, I don't know who they are exactly, is kind of my point. But if they are just people that are automatically further to the right than whoever they're running against, and that's going to make them more palatable to their constituents, but at the price of being weaker candidates in a general election. Is that what you maybe see happening?
It could be. I mean, Mark talked about the different dynamics of the 2022 House race versus the 2022 Senate race. In the House, you're gonna have a couple of things happening in 2022, right? You're gonna have these primary challenges, and these primary challenges are actually far more instructive about, or far more revealing about, the future of the Republican Party than they are about the general direction of national politics, so to speak. I mean, are you going to see a fracturing of the Republican Party? Are you going to see a breakup, or, you know, is there going to be a Patriot Party? However it is, you know, there are some significant dividing forces within the Republican Party, and how that plays out over the next 2 to 4 years is going to be absolutely fascinating. From a political standpoint, from an ideology standpoint, from a philosophical standpoint, all of those sorts of things. Yes, there is the possibility, because we don't know that much about all of these candidates. There is the possibility that you're going to have some historically bad candidates that may or may not put a seat in play. I mean, in order for the seat to come into play, you have to have enough voters in that district that care that it's a historically bad candidate.
Right.
You know, historically bad candidates tend to mean more in statewide races than they do in congressional districts, although there are congressional districts that are close enough that, you know, having a historically bad candidate can make a difference. So it's really hard to say at this point what's going to happen on that standpoint, but that is definitely a possibility. To me, this is just far more instructive on and far more illuminating on the divide that you're seeing within the Republican Party. For example, to me, one of the really interesting political questions is, you know, the never Trumpers, the rhinos, the Republicans against Trump, Republican voters against Trump, whatever you want to call them. Where do they find a home? Who do they start voting for? What values do they care about? What candidates are they interested in? Who is able to attract them on a consistent basis? To me, that's a really interesting question if the Republican Party continues to move further and further to a conspiracy-driven right, as opposed to sort of a more rational right. And so I mean, watching how the Republican Party evolves over the next 2 years and over the next 4 years, I think is going to be really illuminating. Look, Senator Portman from Ohio resigned today. Not resigned, he announced his retirement, so I misspoke, but he announced that he's going to retire from the Senate. He's not going to run for re-election in 2022. And the reason is partisan gridlock. You know, he doesn't feel like he can do anything. And so does that change over the course of the next 2 years? Does that change over the course of the next 4 years? And the direction the Republican Party heads in over the course of the next 2 years, over the course of the next 4 years, and whether we follow the path that Gingrich started in 94 or 92 to its natural conclusion, whether that happens or whether you get a course correction, that's going to determine a lot of what we see moving forward.
Just real quick, I mean, I think Democrats are not immune from this problem too. I mean, Democrats have such a thin, razor thin majority that it's like already anybody that's accused of being too centrist they're looking at primarying them as well. I mean, the guy from West Virginia is already under fire.
Yeah.
And we haven't even voted on anything yet. But just
you're right. I mean, this is what gerrymandering. This is what gerrymandering does.
Let me stop you for a second because I want to actually touch on that. I'm really glad that Matt brought that up, and we'll go to Mark first, and then Vin, and back around to Matt because this is really a big topic. Rather than talk about just the fracturing of the Republican Party, let's talk about the Democratic Party for a moment. Very, very razor thin majorities in the House, obviously a 50-50 split in the Senate, but Nation in West Virginia right there teetering. And of course, we don't, you know, that means Harris has to be the tiebreaker. But here's what I'm concerned with is the perception of the independents' perception of the Democratic Party. And here's what I mean. When Nancy Pelosi ran for Speaker of the House, she did face challenges from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. That didn't really amount to much this time around in 2021. But if you look at the House Democrats and Senate as well, Nancy Pelosi pushing 80, Steny Hoyer of Maryland, I think he's 78 or 79, Jim Clyburn, 78, 79, up there as well. The head of the Democratic Party, for all intents and purposes, Joe Biden, no spring chicken himself. Is this a problem going forward? And we talked about, Democrats talked about grooming the up and coming younger people. I'm not seeing a lot of grooming at all here. Is that a concern, or am I overreacting here, Mark Tanner?
You're not overreacting. I think what you're seeing is the natural evolution of the leadership that evolved, and we have this, let's call it half a dozen people that are either octogenarians or very close to it. that was just that was the natural evolution of the way politics work in Washington. And we've had periods of time like that. So there are many, many younger, bright people in both the House and the Senate. And what's going to happen to some degree is the cream is going to rise to the top. And it's not a question of Pelosi picking a protege and pushing that protege forward, because that won't work today. There's enough independent thought and enough people that are bright, that are young, young meaning 30 to 55 or 60, that will rise to the top based on their natural ability to lead and articulate and communicate and work the system that have to be worked over the next 2 years. And you're going to see, you're going to see it you're going to see names that you've never heard of in the Democratic Party, and more of them. And the Republican Party, we're just going to have to see. Listen, if everybody here would like to join me, I'm starting a party called the Bull Moose Party. And
okay, Teddy.
okay, for those listeners, for those listeners who know what happened when Teddy Roosevelt got frustrated because he wasn't nominated by the Republican Party for president, so he started his own party.
Can I ask Mark a couple follow-ups on that? Because I actually want to get his thoughts on this, if you don't mind. One is, do you think the Democrats should employ term limits for committee chairs? And two, do you think the seniority rules need to be reformed in the House and Senate to ensure younger blood gets into position much quicker?
Okay, oversimplification, yes, but I'm going to take the two separately. Absolutely believe there should be term limits for chairs. And I can feel that way from practical experience. When I was lobbying in Washington in the early 2000s or the middle 2000s, I kept running into these chairmen that just didn't have a clue. They'd been there so long. Okay, so yes, I think there should be term limits so that we get better chairmen that are more motivated, that want to do things because they're not tired mentally or physically. As far as the other seniority, in general, we're not talking about committee, but the general seniority, I think that Darwin's natural selection is going to take place because we have many people that, or excuse me, it's not that many, but a large group of people that are so old that it's not like the ones that are 72 and 73 are going to take the place of the people that are 79 and 80. The 45s and the 50 and the 55s are going to take their place. And the natural selection, the leaders that have the ability, okay, will get there. As you mentioned earlier, Vin, Pelosi fought a hell of a battle 2 years ago to keep the House leadership. This time she sort of skated through, and part of the deal that she made, and we don't know with whom she made it, okay, was that this 2 years will be my last term as speaker no matter what. She didn't say she was going to retire from the House.
Yeah.
She said she would not be the speaker after these 2 years. Okay. And I don't believe that Steny Hoyer is going to be the speaker.
I don't think so either. I agree. I don't think he will be.
So
let me ask you this, Vin, because you brought this up, and as much as I respect Mark Tenner's point of view on this, I'd like to give a very short other perspective, alternative perspective. I worked in the Senate for a year. Now, Vin, you lived next to the Capitol for a number of years, so you know the Senate and the House much better than probably anybody on the panel here. However, I'm concerned with if you constantly have a revolving door of subcommittee chairs and committee chairs and so forth, that would put in other words, changing them every, let's say every 6 or 8, 10 years, doesn't that give an enormous amount of power to the staffs? Because if you were to, you know, staff people really run those committees. We see that who gets the camera time. Of course, it's always the subcommittee chairs and the committee chairs and the senior ranking people. But it's really the people behind the scenes, the attorneys that are not elected. And I can imagine how much power, because those people don't change from year to year. The House Ways and Means Committee, they got attorneys, and that's the most powerful committee, arguably the most powerful committee in the Congress. They've got lawyers that work on that committee that have been there 25 and 30 years. They have enormous power. And if you think the chairman runs that committee, well, it's just as much run by attorneys, unelected people behind the scenes. Question, is that a concern to you if you were to have term limits imposed on committee chairs?
Not as much. And the reason why is Republicans have been doing this for a while, right? Republicans have term limits on committee chairs. And it works. It brings fresh blood in. You've got, and you get all of these fights to grab the chair when a term limit comes up, and you see a change. You see a change. You see a change in direction. You see a change in leadership. You see a change in priorities. And I think that's healthy. I think it makes a lot of sense. I also think you do want staff with institutional memory around. I think that's really important, because one of the things that's actually beneficial about being a committee chair term after term after term is you build up an area of expertise in that area. You understand how to push and pull the levers. You build the relationships over time to get things done. And when you replace them on a regular basis, you lose that. So you need to make up for that loss someplace. And a lot of times the place you make up for it is in the staff. Now, the other thing I like about staff is, if the parties do a good job in hiring staff, now that's a big if, but if the parties do a good job in hiring staff, you're hiring staff that not only have develop an expertise in getting stuff done, but they also, the staff develops this sense of pride and loyalty to that committee. Right? Not just to whomever they're working for, but to that committee, and making sure that committee is able to function and get things done. And there's a level of professionalism in the staff there. So yeah, these are unelected people, but you want to know what? So is much of our regulatory structure. So is, we've got lifers in the State Department, and you've got people in the EPA, and these are all unelected civil servants who are professionals, who take pride in their work, who take pride in getting stuff done. And you want to know and build up a level of expertise. So no, it doesn't bother me that much. I mean, I see what you're saying, but I also have full faith in the ability that you want to know what, if Congress, a new chair comes in and his agenda is not being pursued to the degree and level that which he wants, he's going to shake up the staff, and he's got every right to do it. So that doesn't bother me in the least. But you are right. The staff wields a lot of influence. It's why, as a lobbyist, I spent a lot of time working with staff, and I'm sure, Mark, you spent a lot of time working with staff too, to make sure that you were able to pursue the agenda you needed to.
And I found the staff actually across the board. Mm-hmm. Republicans, Democrats, committees, chairmen. Well, I'd love to tell you a story, but I had.
Can you tell it? Block out the names.
This will be tough. I had a 1-hour lunch meeting with a member of, it was either the House or the Senate, who was extraordinarily high and powerful in the particular body that person was. And I was invited to have a private lunch meeting here in Las Vegas with that individual. And we met at a restaurant, and they closed the curtain, and two of us sat there, and we had a conversation for 45 minutes. And I brought up a number of questions and made a number of points about the issue that I was talking about. And this particular individual pulled out his cell phone and called a member of his staff and put me on the phone with the staff and said, "Is what Mark's saying correct?" And the person said, "Yes." And he said, "Oh, All right. He's going to get back to you with a list of A, B, C, D, and E. I want you to do some research and get back to me on it. And this is information that this very powerful person should have known and didn't have a clue. And if his staff was not as strong, well, and knowledgeable, both in not just in procedure, but in the facts of the issue that was at hand, there would have been no progress. And I only have to assume that that was not an isolated incident.
Oh,
Yeah,
what a great
yeah, Mark, you're 100% right. That was not an isolated incident at all. I mean, I could tell you back in the day, I could approach Tony Blankley. And for those of you that don't remember who Tony Blankley was, he was Newt Gingrich's press secretary / right-hand man, chain smoking genius, actually, on many levels. And come up to him on the side, whether it was first as a reporter and then later as, working as a lobbyist or on issues, and say, what's going on? Why is it going this way? And doing it. And if I could convince Tony Blankley of just how stupid or ludicrous something was, or something that needed to be changed, something would happen. It might not be exactly what you expect to happen or how it would happen, but it would happen. And it's a sign of just how influential a lot of staff or a lot of people behind the scenes can be. Just in terms of that. And, and a lot of it was just remembering what brand of cigarette Tony smoked. Always helped.
Just to maybe to put a cap on this point, because it's really good in terms of understanding how Washington works or doesn't work sometimes, is that because the nature of the political system, particularly in the Congress, because of two-year terms, where as soon as you're elected, you have to immediately start raising money for an election that's only 18 months away before you have to do it again, to a lesser degree in the Senate, but to the same degree that our representatives, whether they be senators or congresspeople, have, because of the nature of the beast, have to spend so much time working on how they're going to hold their office the next time around, that it limits the amount of time that they can spend problem solving. Doesn't mean that they don't do problem solving and that they don't care.
Yep.
But if they don't have really talented staff that can do some of this stuff and carry the water, it's not going to get done. I mean, how many, this COVID relief package that they passed just a few weeks ago for $1.9 trillion, that was, Vin, how many pages was it?
Oh, it was ginormous.
Okay, thousands and thousands of pages. I guarantee you that not one single person that voted on that package read every page of it.
Nope.
Okay, they relied upon the talent of their staff to break it down for them, to dumb it down for them in such a way that they at least they understood for the most part what it was that they were voting on. I mean, I'll give you a great example of being able to do that, whether you agree with him or disagree with him or not. One of Ronald Reagan's talents, whether it was intentional or not, was he said, if you can't give it to me on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with bullet points and explain it so that I understand it within 5 minutes, go back and try again. Okay, and that's the way that he ran the executive branch of the presidency.
What a way to govern. Now, how do you put the U.S. tax code on an 8.5 by 11 sheet? That's what I want to know. All right, so
you
really
don't.
Good.
You better hire some people that understand the tax code. Okay, so, not that he was making decisions on the tax code.
Very good points, gentlemen. Good discussion. Filing this away, Matt Lessinger, for future discussion. Term limits, yes or no? let's have that discussion maybe in the future down the road ahead. Matt Lessinger, we're going to be coming to you on the next one here. Let me just remind the viewers and listeners that this is an Intelligent Conversation episode number 12. It's an encore of number 11 that we did a few weeks ago. We've talked about the past and the present. Now we're going to talk about the future, and specifically the first week or so of the Biden administration, the executive orders, and where he's going and his administration are going, I should say, from here. What's in store ahead? Matt Lessinger, you're happy so far with the job he's doing, and what do you think is in your crystal ball for the Biden administration looking into February and onward?
Well, yes. So just to put this in perspective, I think we're 6 days in to his presidency. These are some of the executive orders he signed. This is not by any means an exhaustive list, because I think he signed something like 30 something to this point, and maybe in the time we've been talking, he's already signed another one or two. But right, rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, rejoin the World Health Organization, mandated mask wearing on federal property, created a pandemic response team, also expanded testing capacity. He halted construction of the border wall, canceled the Keystone Pipeline, removed the Trump ban on travel restrictions for people from those 7 Muslim majority countries. He put an end to that stupid 1776 commission. He extended the moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. He also extended the pause on student loan payments. And today he reversed the ban on transgender Americans joining the military. And like I said, that's not even an exhaustive list. Speaking from a personal standpoint, I'm on board with every single one of those. I do not expect to agree with every single thing that Joe Biden does over the course of 4 years. But so far in his executive orders, he's batting 1,000 in my book. So I want more of the same. I think I'm in the majority. Of course, everyone thinks they're in the majority, but you know, I'll pass the ball to anyone else. Like, are you happy with what's happened so far? Do you have any issue with any of the executive orders that he's issued so far, Vin or Mark?
Vin?
All right, I'll go first. From a policy standpoint, I am not unhappy with the executive orders he's issued. From a theory of governance, I mean, I'm unhappy, sort of generally speaking. I'm unhappy with Trump. I'm unhappy with Bush. I'm unhappy with Reagan. I'm unhappy with Clinton. I oppose the ever encroaching unitary theory of the executive branch, that theory of power where the executive branch keeps amassing more and more power. I think it's bad for the country. I think it's bad for governing. I think Congress needs to stand up. I think they need to man up and start treating their institution the way it used to be treated, which is a co-equal branch of government. Where we are not a parliamentary government. We make noises about saying we're a republic and we're co-equal branches, yet Congress doesn't act like a co-equal branch. And so the fact that we can govern by fiat through executive order is really bothersome. So am I happy that all of these Trump executive orders, which I vehemently disagree with, have been overturned? Yes, I'm happy. I am happy from a policy standpoint. I am not happy that, you know, this is the way things need to get done. And there isn't a frank and open and honest discussion about how Congress reasserts its standing as a co-equal branch of government rather than as a supplicant to the president of the United States. And I think until we start having that discussion and until we start thinking in those sorts of terms, this is going to be American politics for the next, 3, 4, 5 terms. Until we start doing that, it's going to be executive orders that are being undone and redone and undone and redone. And how on earth can you have any standing in the world if the next president can come in and change everything?
That's fair. I mean, sorry, Mark, go ahead. What were you?
Unfortunately, Ben, I agree with you. So it's not a question of the orders that he signed in and what they meant, but the process. And this is one of the things I thought about a lot prior to our coming on today, is how much time we were going to have to talk about the process. because you got a lot of stuff going on right now between McConnell and Schumer, and to a far lesser degree, McCarthy and Pelosi. And the more the House of Representatives and the Senate pass problem-solving legislation, and the less an executive signs a paper dictating what is going to take place and expand upon the interpretation of what he can do, the worse it's going to be for this country, the nature of our republic, but for what's going to accomplish. If we depend upon single individuals, we're going to have exactly what been said. Every 4 years or 8 years or whenever there's a new president that comes in from the other party, they're going to reverse all the executive orders. It's solution that is going to be a long-term failure. And one of the things that Joe said was that he was going to do, or things he said, and he better have meant, and he better have the skill set to be able to put them into practice and to put the people around him to be able to get it done. Things he said is, I'm going to be president for all of America. By the way, I'm not sure there's been a president that's been elected in the last century that hasn't said the same thing. And at least right after they got elected. The other thing he says, I know how to work the aisle. I know how to deal. I know how to talk to the that don't agree with me, and I'm willing. I understand the meaning of compromise, and I'm willing to do it. He's going to have to find a way to put the apparatus together in order to do that. And the 6 days of all these great leaders were terrific, and McConnell Senate should vote the bunches. And he thinks that what Trump did was a cause of what took place at the, and now today they're fighting over the rules to the point where we're back to a Senate isn't going to vote, and it really gets me upset. Now, is there an answer? Yes, there's an answer. The Democrats are in a position to change the rules. The filibuster, it's a two-step, and that'll be the end of it. But that doesn't mean that they're going to sit down and work problem solving. If all it is all the Democrats vote for something and all the Republicans vote against it, and it's a 50 tie and Kamala changes is the tiebreaker, fine. A passes public.
All right, well said, Mark Tenner. We've got about maybe 10, 15 minutes left in our program. We'll wrap it up. This will be my final question. It'll be short and simple, and it really touches on what Mark Tenner just said. Matt, you can take us first with this. Unity. That's all we hear. You know, we've heard the last week on the political talk shows. Certainly, we hear this from the South Lawn of the Capitol in all the inauguration speeches and hoopla. Unity, 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 unity. Is that just an absolute impossible myth, illusion? It won't happen, or is there some chance for unity? Matt Lessinger.
I mean, is there a chance for absolute unity? No, but is there a chance for greater unity than what we had the past 4 years? Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty low bar. So, I mean, I think we can only get better in terms of that. I mean, that this ties in with what they were saying before. I mean, I feel I've gained a sort of gained a perspective into how the other side thinks that I wasn't expecting to have. I mean, for 4 years, what was the Senate? I want to say 52-48 in terms of Republicans. And for just about every thing that was being voted on, every reasonable Democrat's hopes were hanging on Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski or Mitt Romney. We're like, can we please have 3 sensible Republicans that, can vote their conscience or whatever, just we're looking for those moderates. Now we're in an unexpected to me majority. And now, in order to get anything passed, every single Democrat has to be on board with everything. And like I mentioned before, at the second somebody appears like they're even thinking of dissenting, that they're getting reprimanded, by the public and by their own party. How are we going to have unity like that? I mean, but I get it. Like, from my perspective, I'm like, oh shit, he better not, defect. He better not vote against this Joe Biden policy and make it 51-49 against, so now I'm feeling the same way that I realize Republicans must have felt, where they're like, holding the reins tightly on every single moderate, hoping that they won't cross the aisle. So the long-term solution to me, from both a political and a social aspect, is we need more independence. And how we get there is beyond the scope of this discussion. But I mean, what do we have? We have Angus King in Maine, right? I think that's it. And he pretty much, if you see an interview with him, people are like, well, it seems like you vote Democrat all the time. And it's like, well, yeah, what they are proposing makes more sense. He's not a Democrat. He's just a reasonable thinking person. And he's like, okay, if Republicans put in front of me something reasonable, I'll side with them. We need at least 10 of those, or 10% of the Senate and the House to be independent. And it's impossible to get there under the current structure, but being an idealist, I'd like to think we could get there someday. And then, then you might have steps towards unity, because you have to. You have to come together for, because they're not on either side. So it's like you have to meet them in the middle. Short of that, are we going to get real unity in this political climate? No, it doesn't seem that way.
Very good. Then Narayanan.
I'll take a more radical approach to this from an institutional reform standpoint than Mark took, which is, I agree, we need to nuke the filibuster. But in addition to nuking the filibuster, we also need to return earmarks. And I think what
Excuse me. We know this on the panel, but define very quickly in 20 seconds earmarks.
Earmarks are simply, you can earmark money for pet projects in a state, pork barrel politics, however you want to do it. And the reason why is, I believe that if you nuke the filibuster and you bring back earmarks, you incentivize deal making. Right now, there is no political incentive to make deals. There is political incentive to be an ideological purist. But if you bring back earmarks and you bring back the filibuster, all right, if you are in the opposition party and that they're going to be able to pass legislation, and you say, hey, I just want these three things in here. If you get these three things in here, we'll vote for it. Well, they might do that, because you want to know what? Passing something 55-45 or 60-40 looks a whole lot better than passing it 50-50, and it doesn't cost them a whole lot to get to that point. Similarly, if you bring back earmarks, if you bring back politics, everyone's like, oh, it corrupts the system and that sort of thing. Yeah, it does to a certain degree, but it also incentivizes deal making. It's like, all right, you want to know what? I'll support your stupid bridge over this creek that no one's going to use if you help me build, the subway system that needs to get done over here. And you want to know what? It works. And it doesn't have to be a stupid creek. It could be like a really important bridge that connects two rural communities. And you want to know what? You really need the money for that in the state, because those two communities, if you connect those two communities together, you improve commerce, you improve transportation, you improve all sorts of things. And you trade that bridge for a bridge in a city. Well, you can't do that right now. The system doesn't allow for it. And so, are there problems with? Yeah, but I would rather live with the problems that incentivizes deal making than exist in a system where people have no incentives to make deals whatsoever. Deals whatsoever. The game theory just doesn't work. So nuke the filibuster, bring back earmarks, incentivize deal making and compromise, and I think you're actually in a much better position than you are now.
I have a quick question. When did they take them away?
Mark, was it late 90s?
Yeah, I mean, they still have, there was a lot of pork in every, if you take a huge bill, there's going to be some pork in it.
Yeah.
But the time of,
which is why they've been calling for a line item veto. I think that's been another controversial thing about should there be a line item veto where these so-called pork things can be taken out of a bill, which, by the way, future topic for another show, but go ahead.
well, yeah, that's an interesting conversation, and that was Clinton was the one that was fighting for the line item veto. But
Reagan before that.
Being bringing all the historical references that I seem to bring based on my love of history, we had a Senate Majority Leader for a number of years that was probably, certainly, history, the best maker there was, and that was Lyndon Johnson.
Yep.
And had it not been for the Vietnam War, and people would have focused on what he did, both as a Senate Majority Leader and as a president, he probably would have gone down as one of the greatest politicians, presidents, progressives for this country in our history. He knew how to make a deal. And then when you first started, I immediately said, I agree we have to blow up the filibuster, but you want to bring back pork barrel legislation? Then I listened to you. And I would rather have a bridge to nowhere and a subway system than go 18 months without passing a relief bill. Okay, do what you got to do. And it gets me back to the soapbox that I was on much earlier, which was the need for leadership, not just young leadership, but leadership for people who will listen and think and surround themselves with the people that say, we want to solve problems. Now, how are we going to solve the problem? If we can solve 70% of the problem and we don't like having to give up the 30, okay, because I don't want to get zero. And there's just been too much zero in the last 4 years. And this isn't going to happen overnight. And boy, I look forward to the next time I'm invited to this discussion, work on this topic.
Beautiful. I've got one final question that'll be short before I ask that question and take us out. Matt Lessinger, my co-host, any questions for our panel, sir?
I guess so. I hope this isn't outside the scope. I mean, this is sort of changing the topic a little bit, but I really wanted to touch on this. Dominion, the voting company, the voting machine company, right? They just sued Rudy Giuliani for $1.3 billion. And he immediately today had to make a public statement saying, oh, yeah, Biden is officially the president, Kamala Harris is officially the vice president. Before that, right, Dominion had sued other right-wing news outlets, and they immediately had to retract things they said about, things they had said about Dominion being faulty or giving votes to the wrong people. Why aren't other people following Dominion's example? And this is a legitimate question. This is not a rhetorical question because there's probably reasons that I don't understand or haven't thought of. But I mean,
I'd like to ask,
you go ahead.
Excuse me, Matt. I just want you to clarify your question because it's a good one. But you said, why aren't people following in Dominion's footsteps? Do you mean people who have been libeled or
Yes.
what have you? Or do you mean companies? Because Dominion's a company that's been,
Right.
That now is in jeopardy. That can they do this because their reputation's been tainted, so to speak? Can you clarify a little more, please?
So I don't know the details or the intricacies of libel laws, but speaking for both individuals and companies, like how many of them have been slandered over the past 4 years with no repercussions? So it's like now that Trump is no longer president, I mean, don't these people need to reclaim their reputations? Like what happened to libel law? Like I just feel like a few years back, if you said even the slightest thing wrong about somebody in public, you would get lawsuits up your ass. And it's like now, Twitter. So here's the thing. I understand that tweets and Facebook posts, there's no national policy regarding the libel laws as far as those are concerned. I think it's more
Well,
Um,
there's policy. Mark, do you want to explain actual malice and public figure exceptions?
Yeah, it's, first of all, just an oversimplification, just so everybody understands. Slander is saying something untruthful, and causing damage from having said it. And libel is writing something untruthful and causing damage for having written it.
which one do tweets and Facebook posts fall under?
Okay, the thing
Libel.
is
Okay.
that there's a law in the books that right now, and it's controversial because they're talking about removing that law, that protect Facebook and Twitter from being sued for having published somebody's slander or libel.
Okay.
And that needs to be addressed by a Congress when they get, after they're done with the infrastructure bill, and term limits, they'll attack that one. Let me just point out that this is a whole area of tort law, libel and slander, that it's very expensive to sue somebody for libel or slander. The two things that have to happen is, one, that you have to prove that what they said was untrue. And two, even if it was untrue, that it damaged you, and you have to prove the financial amount of the damages. That's a very expensive process, okay? And not everybody can afford it, because if you're gonna hire an attorney and pay the attorney to file the lawsuit, you'll go. So you have to get an attorney that's willing to take it on a contingency where you don't have to pay him. He gets a percentage of whatever the recovery is. And no attorney that does that is going to do it unless they think they're going to win, because they're going to lose money on it. So, and the person you sue has to be collectible.
But this is what Trump has done for decades, right?
Yes.
He's filed frivolous lawsuits. I mean, they didn't really stand much of a chance of winning. It was just that whoever was the defendant couldn't afford to pay the legal fees. So why can't people be doing that in reverse?
I happen to be one of those defendants in a Trump lawsuit in the 70s.
Okay.
Which is another story unto
Yeah,
itself.
note to
Filing it
Nolan.
away.
We need to get that
Filing
story
that
on.
away.
Okay.
Nolan's heard the story, but
Yeah.
it's very, very expensive to defend yourself.
Right. It's expensive to defend yourself. So why aren't more people filing and forcing these people to defend themselves, I guess is my question.
Because it's also expensive to sue somebody.
Yeah.
So the only way that you can afford to do it is to get an attorney who will pay the cost of the lawsuit. You can't pay them yourself. This company, okay, they've got the resources, and they're out of business if they don't win this lawsuit. And Giuliani, he may have billed Trump $20,000 a day. We don't know how much Trump actually paid him, but Giuliani's made millions and millions and millions as a consultant since he left public office. So he's collectible, and he says stupid things, and he's got a big mouth.
Yeah, and look, there are other aspects of libel law and slander law that are important, right? Like public figures, for example. You can say a lot more about public figures than you can say about a private company or a private individual. Dominion is a private company, and you can't get away with saying the types of things about a private company that you can get away with saying about a public individual. And so Giuliani and President Trump and everyone going after him, they treated Dominion like it was a public official. And you can't do that. It's a private company, and it's a completely different bar. And the fact of the matter is, the reason why Sinclair put all those retraction stories out, the reason why Fox News put all those retraction stories out there is because they knew they were going to lose. And this was how they prevented losing. And Rudy Giuliani's got this statement out there because he knows he's going to lose. Dominion has him by the short hairs, and if they really want to extract as much money from him as possible, they can. This is their case to win.
Gentlemen,
Okay,
marvelous.
No, thank you for the answers.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Good question, Matt Lessinger. Gentlemen, last question. We try to do this. We've tried to do this on our last few shows. We try to throw, like I call it, a curveball. None of my panelists here know what's what's coming, and I'll even take a crack at it, get the final word. You have, the phone just rang in your home. The phone just rang. White House, President Biden on the line. You have 60 seconds, maybe 90 seconds, but no more because we're out of time, to tell President Biden something, to advise him on something, to encourage him, to give him hope, to say one thing or many things, however much can fit in 60 or 90 seconds to President Joe Biden. By that, I'm making this long so you can think of your answer. You ever want the interviewer to like talk long so I can think of my answer? That's why I'm kind of like rambling here, because I'd see the wheels turning on all three of your minds. But I'll let you raise your hand if you're ready to fire away at your answer. We're all going to answer this. Ring, ring, ring. White House, Joe Biden on the phone. Mark Tenner.
Mr. President, make a list of the 10 most important things that you want to accomplish and then attack them one single thing at a time. Do not lump them together.
Mark, I love that. There's a copywriting principle called the power of one. And that fully taps into every explosive element of that principle.
And he's kind of done that already, right? I mean, he did a bullet point of like, on day one, I want to address this. On day two, I want to address this. And I mean, he's going to need more than one day to address each of his problems.
He also said, I'm going to send the last COVID package was a down payment, and I'm going to send the next one, and it's going to include this long list of things in it. And I would not have done it like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. One thing at a time. I'm with you, Mark. I can go next and let Matt think a little more. My thing would be, Mr. President, remember the lessons from the Obama administration. You were there when they tried to pass healthcare reform, and you were there when they tried to do all sorts of different legislation and spent tons of time chasing votes and making compromises and doing all sorts of things that ultimately didn't give you any votes. The only thing it did, it wasted time. The only thing it did, it watered down the legislation you actually wanted to pass. If you get any sense that they're stalling, you're not going to get their votes over this, that they're hanging on a line, your timeline is running short, go with the 50-50. Get every Democrat in line. Do whatever you have to do to get Manchin in line. Get that vote passed. Let Vice President Harris do it, and get your legislation through, because your legislation and your policies are actually centrist and they're actually bipartisan, and people are going to like it, even if the Republicans don't vote for it. Go ahead and get it through and learn that lesson from the Obama administration.
Mr. President, I don't know why you're calling me. I've got no good advice to offer you. Why are you wasting your time calling me?
Wrong number.
Yeah, I think you got the wrong number. But since I'm here, yeah, I'm just going to tell you what my friend Vin Narayanan just said. Basically, just remember that your policies are supported by the vast majority of the population. Just because 50 Republicans are lined up against you in the Senate doesn't mean they represent half the country. That's all. Now talk to somebody more important than me. You don't need to be talking to me. Yeah.
Mr. President, thank you. Those would be the first two words I would use, would be thank you. The last 5 or 6 years of my life, I felt as though I've been robbed. And tens of millions of Americans have been robbed of our time, of our energy, of our hope. We've been diverted to watching the news, fearing every time we open the internet that there's some ridiculous tweet from the previous occupant of that office, fearing the worst, looking at the worst of ourselves the last 4 years and hating every single second of it. Thank you for rescuing us from that travesty. Thank you for rescuing us from that cruelty. Thank you for being you. I didn't vote for you in the primary. I was on the progressive wing of the Democrats, but I have always respected you, sir. I've always thought you were a decent man. And right now, the one thing we need, courage, leadership, but decency. And thank you for restoring that and giving that to us. That would be my 60 seconds to President Biden. Thank you for our panel. We've had Mark Tenner, Vin Narayanan, and my co-host, Matt Lessinger. I really enjoyed this one. I hope those of you watching enjoyed it as well. Please email either Matt Lessinger or myself, Nolan Dalla. We try to do this once a week. This is number 12. We're going to talk about the Super Bowl next week. Matt and I, we're going to talk about Super Bowl betting and all the fun regarding the football game. And this is a cool thing about the two guests that we have here. I'm going to go a little long just for a second because I could have Matt, I could have Matt as well, but Vin and Mark on and talk about just about anything, and they're going to have something interesting to say. So Matt and I are extremely blessed to have a lot of friends and a lot of people watching who are our friends who are giving of your time, and you have your opinions. And thank you for that. And we will hopefully get a lot of you on in future shows of an intelligent conversation. So for Matt Lessinger and myself, I'm Nolan Dalla. We'll see you next time. Good night.
Thank you, guys.